I'm trying to say is that a system of inequality, which usually has worked for white people, has set us up and created a mentality of expectation and entitlement that can't always be fulfilled, right? A couple years back during the recession, Newsweek did a cover story about all these executives who'd lost their jobs, because it didn't just hit working class folks. A lot of middle management and even executives were getting laid off. They had this story about this white guy, right? He was interviewed, and he's talking about how he lost his job as the chief financial officer at some company. And he said, whenever I'm out there looking for work, I feel so ashamed, right? And he said, I feel like there's a big sign hanging around my neck, a neon sign that says unemployed bum. I remember reading that and thinking, man, who told you that unemployed people were bums? You know, I know who didn't tell you that. Unemployed people. I know who else didn't tell you that. Any person of color didn't tell you that. You know who told you that unemployed people were bums? You told you that unemployed people were bums. That's the irony of this system. The irony of this system is that it sets us all up to believe that certain outcomes are going to happen. And if you're white, you've had the luxury of believing them. And then when they don't, the level of frustration, frustrated expectations creates this kind of self-hatred that you take out on yourself, or hatred of others that you take out on them, but none of it solves the problem, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is that inequality has a downside, not just for the people on the bottom, but even for some of the folks up here. Because the minute that it can't be sustained anymore, the minute that that system falls apart, and things do change, you know, the world is always changing. And if you're not ready for change, you're not ready for change. James Baldwin also said something about that. He was talking about how people of color sometimes, how black folks in particular, about whom he was writing, are the most prepared for crisis. And sometimes white folks are the least prepared. This is what he said. In this case, he was speaking about black folks. He said, that man who has to snatch his humanity every day out of the fires of human cruelty that rage to destroy it, learns something about himself in the process that no school and no church can teach. He gains a sense of his own authority, and that is unshakable, because in order to save his life, he has to learn to read the meaning behind the words, to read between the lines, to take nothing for granted. And Baldwin concludes by saying, when you are constantly having to survive the worst that life can bring, you cease to be afraid of what life can bring. The flip side of that is that when you haven't had to survive the worst that life can bring because you've been the favored group, and suddenly the worst that life can bring is staring you in the face, you have no idea how to cope with it.